So welcome everyone to the rise of AI. It's one of those subjects that I think I've seen, and a week is a long time in politics, and I think a day is a long time in AI, because even in the last week things have changed quite dramatically, you have to look at it almost on a daily basis. So I'm really glad to see so many people attending today. I hope you find it interesting. It's a lot to get through. I suspect we could have had this for 3 or 4 hours and still not only scratched the surface, but our intention is to run some more of these, perhaps on specific topics. So that'd be interesting to see where you'd like to discuss that. Let's invite those people. Oh, that's it. Thank you, whoever that was letting them in. Right, some house rules. Those who aren't actually on the panel, could I ask you to turn off your webcams and mute your microphones, mainly because this keeps the bandwidth clear. If you want to raise any questions, our intention is perhaps towards the end, we'll invite you to ask questions. But when you do, perhaps raise a hand, because I can imagine having 20 people come in and go, me, might be a bit over the top. We are recording this. Our intention is, as with previous ones, is we'll put this up on our YouTube channel and our social media channels probably next week. Whether that's a full video or just like a podcast, we'll make the decision when we get to it. So over the last few weeks and months, we've seen quite a rise in the trials and tribulations of AI even. We have ChatGPT, we have Lambda, and many other AI engines in the arena, and the various interfaces to use them. So we have Bard as the front end from Google, and that uses Google's Lambda engine, ChatGPT, which is used by Microsoft, among others, and obviously everyone else who's got access to it, including myself. And AI may be the biggest thing to hit the planet since the invention of the wheel, steam engines, or the atomic age. I think we're only scratching the surface at the moment of what it's going to do. Many people say this is the end of the world for many professionals, including teachers, lawyers, and people like ourselves in IT, specifically those in the software development industry. I think that may be a bit doom and gloom. Everyone assumes that's because we work in IT. I think everyone thinks we all know about AI, but because many of us work in our own industrial silos, whether it's insurance, stock control, management systems, etc. So, and we're blissfully unaware of what's going on, other than the fact there's something called AI. And so hopefully today we'll get a little bit more knowledge of what's going on out there, and perhaps see the threats and opportunities that it may offer. So I'm going to read off a sheet because it was here. I'd like to introduce you to 4 of your IEP colleagues who've agreed to be part of this fireside chat. Samuel, who's got decades of experience in the IT industry. He's been around at the HM Revenue and Customs, E-Trade Securities, Halliburton, Standard Charter, etc., where he is currently working, and worked on many wide range of projects, including machine learning models, etc. Nathan is a commercial and technology background, again, over decades, providing solutions in the private and public sectors on using technology to streamline and automate business functions, including expert systems. Michael, I've had but is technical director at Mapsoft and Adobe partner, and he's been working on AI tools around PDF documents, and I believe recently sort of back from Moldova because it was getting a bit hot out there with the current situation in the Ukraine. And finally, Ben Collier, who's a technical leader, developer, again, decades of experience, and he's worked through fintech, genetics, healthcare, media, government, and he's currently head of development at the UK Health Security Agency, and is working, or has previously worked, on biological plausible AI models. So a fair range of people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the guys to basically start off. I shall, how should I say, prompt the questions, and they can go off and discuss it. I may drop in, and we'll go from there. But I'd like to ask Ben, first of all, perhaps to explain what is AI?
It's a really
Ben.
interesting question, isn't it? First off, I should make sure I'm not on mute. Can you hear me? I'm all good. Okay, fantastic. So, I would imagine that first off, I'm speaking to a very educated audience. Members of the IAP will have had a background in computer science, and I would imagine you've come from all sorts of angles and potentially have been present in various of the sort of movements of AI that we've seen over the past few years and decades and almost centuries, if you like. I suppose the first question is, well, what is artificial intelligence? I think that the definition has narrowed significantly. I think for some reason I've just been struck with this image of the Bat computer. I don't remember if you remember the Batman series from the 1960s with him in his tights, and he would put in a card from the Joker with his riddle, and it would stick it in, and it would go through the computer, and the computer would spit out an answer to the riddle or something like that. But I think when people first met computers, they assumed a level of intelligence. You know, people would get onto a CLI, and they would start writing plain English because they assumed that the computer was intelligent. So a lot of what people refer to as artificial intelligence early on were either tricks, effectively tricks, like the ELIZA engine, which impersonated a therapist, basically by parroting what people said back to them. You know, why do you think this? You know, whatever it was, and that was actually quite that was quite convincing for a lot of people. Or an expert system, so another form of what people considered at one time to be artificial intelligence, which was just a system with a large number of rules that had been trained to be very, very good at one thing. And a lot of the chess systems were basically expert systems. What we currently consider to be AI is what we're seeing in ChatGPT, which is why we're all here, right? Which is a system which, I suppose the distinction here is it's not a trick. What's going on is a system that mimics the human mind. It has neurons, it has mechanisms of attention, and it's able to quickly respond to pretty much anything you can say. Now, the question is whether we'll continue to consider that actually really an artificial intelligence as we go on. There are a lot of existential questions that are going to come out of this. But I don't suppose I can really answer this question without going back to old Turing with his Turing test. And he said that, you know, if you can't tell it's a computer, if you have a conversation, I can't remember how long he said it was for, 2 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I can't remember. Perhaps someone can tell me. But if you can have a conversation and not think and not be cottoned on to the fact that this thing is a computer, then it's, to all intents and purposes, it's intelligent. But I'm not sure that the Turing test necessarily holds anymore. So that would be my answer to that question about what AI really is. John, I don't know if you wanted me to go into the sort of the any more of the history of AI. I mean, we've seen this kind of succession of bursts. It's a bit like cold fusion. I think everyone thought that artificial intelligence was a bit like cold fusion. You know, every 2 years there'd be a news article saying that there'd been amazing discoveries and that we'd be there in 10, 20 years. What's happened with AI, of course, is we seem to now be in a place where it really has happened. The AI winters have probably ended once and for all, and things are about to get kind of fruity.
No, I think that's pretty good, Ben. And I've got a few items to go through here, which I'm sure by the time people start getting into, you guys start talking about them, it will go there. So the first bit, I suppose, now is for the panel to discuss is whether using AI in the workplace, exploiting the tools, what effect do you think it will have on the workforce? And obviously, is Is it helping? Is it going to replace the workforce? How is it going to affect productivity? Obviously, it's far-ranging in other industries, so perhaps if we can try and exploit it around our field, it would be quite good. So I'll open it up to the panel and I'll just pick somebody randomly. So I think I'll start with Michael, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting when you say about our industry, because although we're talking about IT, we're programmers. My specific field has been for the last 3 decades has been working with document systems, creative artists, etc. So I actually see my industry not just being IT, but being specifically in those areas, and I specialize in working with Adobe products and technologies. Now, we talked about ChatGPT as being sort of one of the major enhancements, but actually over, I'd say, particularly the last 5 years, Adobe have been working on their Sensei AI technology. So I'd already seen what could be done way before November, when ChatGPT really came out and people started using that, and that's in manipulation of images, the automatic creation of document output, so that the AI systems which have come into products like Photoshop, like InDesign, for example, and of course, most recently, you probably all have heard about Firefly. One of the big issues has been with the creation of graphics is that the intellectual property rights, should we be using these engines at all? In terms of the graphics world, I think Adobe have got a really hard decision to make in terms of the workforce. Obviously, they don't want to damage their own industry in having all of their artists, the creative people, losing their jobs because everybody can do it. But unfortunately, with these tools coming out, if they don't produce something that competes heavily with these tools, then they're not going to be in the marketplace perhaps in the next few years. So they've got a really difficult decision to make. I think what they're doing is they're basing on the fact that probably people who don't normally work with images and graphics, who are capable, so they're actually going to increase their user base. But I think it's a fine line between those people who do this professionally and those people that can do this as amateurs, if you want to call them amateurs. So the biggest issue for images and for graphics is the intellectual property rights on the materials which are being used in creating the final output images. Adobe are getting around this by they've got this massive stock library where the authors of the creators of the images are going to be able to tag their images to say, or their artwork to say, whether they gave the Firefly engine the permission, or the Sensei engine the permission to use their artwork for output images. So I see it from that side. Yes, I'm working with the text-based stuff, with the image stuff, and in terms of workforce, that the developers that work with Adobe products, all these new APIs coming out, actually, well, potentially it gives work for the developers to use all of these within the product. So from the point of view of is it going to destroy the software developers working in the creative design market? I think not. I think it's going to actually have the opposite effect.
Yeah. Nathan, your views.
So I would agree with what Michael said. I would also add that AI is basically encroaching and making progress in the various different sort of areas of human senses, in sight, in terms of visual sort of imagery, in terms of sort of audio sort of AI sort of tools have now are being also increasingly being used to create sort of new sounds, sort of music. You've got even some tools that can actually compose music, and even sort of smells when it comes to sort of making fragrances as well. So we will see sort of certainly sort of AI being used, although it may be called by different names, sort of increasingly sort of to do various creative things. I think as technologists, members of AI of the IAP, we actually have a very important pivotal role in trying to, at the very least, be aware of these things, but ideally sort of get sort of behind these, so that we can not only sort of help sort of to direct clients and developments sort of using these tools, but hopefully we can do so in a responsible fashion. I think we're heading into very exciting times. The future will definitely contain more AI, not less AI. I don't believe it's a passing fad. AI has been gaining ground over the last 50 years, and AI sometimes has various pseudonyms. Smartphones sort of use AI in different ways. But I think one of the key problems, just touching on what Ben said earlier in the introduction, although the definition of AI is probably somewhat static, people's perception of what constitutes AI is constantly evolving, and that's a very interesting
All right,
sort of
you want
point.
to should I
It's a
pull
very
it up?
interesting.
Or-
Oh, I got it up here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very
Okay.
interesting sort of
All right, so
idea.
the Microsoft 365 licensing.
Hold on.
Okay, I think that it's a very interesting sort of term, sort of that unlike many other terms that are defined in the dictionary, if you like, sort of which pretty much remain static sort of over decades, AI sort of people in each and every sort of, I suppose, decade sort of do struggle sort of to define exactly what AI means sort of to sort of the present audience, and we will certainly see it evolving. But AI, generally speaking, is essentially sort of whatever we consider today to be sort of pretty smart, but obviously sort of tomorrow sort of we will no longer think sort of what AI was doing yesterday was smart. But I do think that our members sort of should be researching the different types of AIs that there are. They should be sort of thinking about sort of what they can exploit, and certainly when they are meeting with clients, whether they're working freelancing or whether they're working in public or private sector organizations, they should be educating people sort of in AI, because and we're going to come on onto this point sort of later on, but when it comes to sort of the ethical question of AI, so if people are ignorant of what AI can do and where AI can go, so the danger is that we might take a wrong turn. But it definitely sort of can help to improve productivity, and it's an unstoppable there's an unstoppable progression. So if we don't jump on it, sort of we're going to get left behind.
Wonderful. Samuel.
Yes, it's I'm only going to add a little to what has been said already, because a lot has been said now. But I'll also like to weigh in into what is AI. And basically, at the moment, from the current definition and from what we've seen so far, there's a lot of things that are not AI. But what is AI is a solution or a tool that learns and adapts. If those two things are not in it at the moment, it is not AI. Any rule-based system is not necessarily AI. Some of the old chatbots that we had in the past were not even AI because they were rules-driven. But now, looking at something like ChatGPT and all the other new ones like BERT that are coming out, the key thing is that this thing learns and adapts. And that's what makes it AI. That's what makes it such that it can surprise us in the answers that it comes out with. And it not only takes in the knowledge base that's been put into it, but it analyzes it as well. I would like to also add that AI, I don't believe for 1 second that it will drive us all out of the workforce. It will not take over the programmer's job. It will not do any of those things. Although, of course, I must admit that there will be casualties. The first thing I need to say really is it is going to have to force us to embrace a different instinct. Now we need to embrace the instinct of learning and reskilling if we need to get on. So many reasons why AI will not drive us out of work. In fact, it will create more jobs. For instance, we are already talking about the ethics and the legal aspects of it. Somebody has got to work these things out. We've got to now start thinking of how people will not misuse AI. And for our institution especially, we need to be in on this as well. We need to be part of the stakeholders that help to form guidelines, that help to promote the ethics and so on. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Samuel. Ben, your thoughts?
Wow. Okay. Well, we were sort of talking about this effect. Well, I'm willing to go up against you on what it'll do to us. I think that certainly there are a lot of hurdles that will need to be overcome with AI before it really drives everything completely bonkers. One of the really big ones is explainability. The more complex and subtle the AI has become, the more difficult it is for us to understand how they've arrived at their decisions. So explainability is a massive deal. I'll leave that there because I want to get on to this business of will it put us out of work. I'm going to go for a full Werner Vinge, and I'm going to say that we're at the bottom of a sigmoid curve. A lot of what we hear from people, I believe, is rather similar to a lot of what was written about computers in around maybe 1976, 78, 80. Maybe what people said about computers and electronic mail and the BBS scene, all of these sort of things about, oh, it's not going to replace the bank, all of these sorts of things. I think there's a danger of that. I think that being at the bottom of a very, very long exponential curve, it is very easy for us to potentially employ a lack of imagination. And of course, it's important to remember that this is the first time that a technology that we've invented. Historically, we invented technology, it puts a load of people out of work, but then they all go and do something more effective. But now we've created something that's potentially going to be much more intelligent than us. And at that point, it becomes very difficult for us to map out exactly what the point of human being is. So I don't believe it'll happen immediately, but I do think that AI will fundamentally change what it even means to be human. And I don't know what the time frame is for it, but I think in the medium term, for sure, it's going to create tons of jobs. But in the bit further to that, I think things are going to start getting very interesting, especially once people associate AIs with, if we give them motivation functions. And I'm more than happy to speak about that later. But once it has its own motivations, then we get into the land of the paperclip maximizer, if anyone's familiar with that term.
Yeah, I think I'll add something I was reading the other day about in terms of developers, and as I came from a coding background, was that they fed a computer program into the AI. It rewrote it to optimize it and make it better. And when they ran the code afterwards, it ran 2.5 times faster than it used to. Now, do I see that as rewriting? As it wasn't writing new code, it was rewriting. You could argue it probably stripped it apart, put it back together. But I do see, certainly in the short term, I think, as you said, it will be there maybe as an assistant, except the assistant will probably be cleverer than the operator.
The issue, a lot of the issue, and this comes back to this explainability. I have colleagues who work in chip design, CPU design, and they're unwilling to use AI technology because AI produces circuits that are remarkable. They'll do things that are completely, they're loads better than what could be, what a human being could devise. The problem is no one understands why it works. they'll take a look at it and just, it's a load of components. It looks like garbage. They've got absolutely no idea how it works, but it works a loads faster. But no one's willing to take a punt on that. And at some point, we're going to lose faith in our own ability to make these judgments, and then everything just goes.
Exactly.
John,
So
sorry,
in-
could I just
Okay,
come
yes,
back on that? Could I just come back on that?
Go on,
You know,
Nathan.
throughout history, sort of man has invented various tools. You know, if you want to go back to the Stone Age, and even though sort of they've created sort of various tools which potentially make sort of certain jobs much easier, I think man has actually become more intelligent with those tools. I take what I hear what Ben's saying, but I think as with every generation or every new development, sort of certainly the skills bar sort of gets pushed higher and higher and higher. And but I do believe that human beings can rise to the challenge. At least certain people will, and they will become even brighter and smarter, because ultimately AI should be and can be used as a tool. But just like any tools, even a knife could be used for bad purposes, and you know, nuclear fission and nuclear technology can also be used for bad. I do think sort of that, you know, as long as we manage this correctly, you know, as with any other technology, sort of it can be for our benefit. If we don't, if we mismanage it, and this is as I say, where ethics and guidelines comes into it, then obviously, you know, it could be to our detriment.
Good. Samuel.
Yes. Change what it means to be human. That's
Absolutely.
a big thing, really scary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But then again, it could change it for the better. It's all in our hands to be. Yeah, we don't have to be pessimistic about it.
Yeah.
And the key thing is that it is still our responsibility to regulate it and to look at the ethics. It's something we need to really work hard on. I think there are efforts to do that already, and we should be part of that effort. It may be that these are the areas in which it will create the jobs, trying to prevent it from doing the wrong thing. And then, of course, regarding explainable AI, that is another area where people are looking right now. It is true, yes, that some people, in fact, most people prefer it to be explainable. And that is probably one of the levels that it will get onto, that it should be able to explain its steps. So I think it all depends on how we take it, on how we take the challenge of facing the ethics of it and taking the responsibility, not just in the organization, but even worldwide, to regulate it, to collaborate together and make sure we use it to effectively for the right reasons.
That's good. Good. I think we'll draw a slight line under this, as we've still got quite a bit to get through. But I can see, as I said, we will hold further webinars on some of these subjects as individual topics and perhaps in a lot more detail. So I suppose the next question is, do we have enough skills currently, whether it's the UK or worldwide, in these technologies, and where are we going to find them from? Let's start with Nathan.
Well, I do think we've got a lot of the skills, that will be necessary, but I do think sort of that there will be new skills that need to be created. I do think sort of that AI itself will spawn new skills, and I do think sort of that in order sort of to do this right, sort of we will need a collaboration of a multidisciplinary sort of teams of people in order to get AI right, because it's not just about sort of the technology, about programming. On the one hand, sort of that there is desire sort of to develop AI sort of in order sort of to do what human beings can currently do, but we also need to be able to think out the box and think, what are there any things that AI can do which we can't do, and which can actually sort of assist us, and I think and I think that's going to sort of spawn, as I say, sort of a very new type of thinking and roles. And we've seen this just briefly in the medical industry over the last 40-50 years, where there have been advances in medical technology, that there have been a reduction in the volume of staff working in particular roles, but there have been an increase in the number of different types of roles. So much so that we see technology sort of fracturing sort of every industry so that it really sort of pervades, and we'll see that even more so in the technology industry as well.
Yeah. Michael.
Yeah, this particular question is interesting because I was having to think about this in terms, do we have enough skills in the workforce? I'd stop just there. I think that do we have enough people in the IT industry? Well, I think the answer to that is no. And can it cope with the extra the extra amount of work that might be required with AI? This is quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because I just thinking about my own use of AI recently. Could I say that I don't need another software developer working alongside me at the moment because the AI technology that I'm using is actually giving me enough assistance to feel that I don't need somebody else working with me? So it could be that what is actually happening is that AI is freeing up people from certain types of work and therefore making them more available for working with the new technologies, the new interfaces, new APIs, etc., that are coming out. I think it's a very difficult question, isn't it? I mean, if you base it on the number of redundancies, for example, which have recently happened in the US, where being tens of thousands of people losing their jobs from fairly well publicized. What are they going to be doing next? Well, perhaps the AI is going to provide some opportunities for people that are losing their jobs. So I think it's an extremely difficult thing to judge. It's a matter of is this technology going to be coming used enough to maintain the jobs of the people that are losing their jobs because the AI is providing enough assistance to developers in companies where they don't need more developers? Difficult question.
Yeah. Ben.
It's interesting, Michael. You stole my smart line about the workforce. I totally agree. We don't have anywhere near enough people, especially in this country, to fill all the roles that we'd like to fill. It's an interesting question. I think there are some very peculiar avenues that we're going to go down. I mean, certainly, if anyone's familiar with the trajectory that ChatGPT has taken, when I first saw ChatGPT. And we'd seen kind of various foreshadowings of similar stuff in earlier technologies, the sorts of things that were making the Google programmers decide that the AI was conscious and all of this sort of stuff. We saw news articles of it prefiguring this, but once ChatGPT came out, I think the first thing I saw was somebody had written this line that said, write biblical verse in the style of the King James version of the Bible to describe how to remove a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from a VCR. And of course, you got this thing, and it was hilarious, and everyone laughed. A month later, if you wrote that into ChatGPT would respond by saying, "I'm terribly sorry, but that's a disrespectful thing to ask me to do." I'm paraphrasing. You've all come across this, I'm sure. It's disrespectful. I can't do these sorts of things because that would be bad. And what's happened there is there are people involved in training a model that's presumably sitting in front of ChatGPT. I've not seen the schematics or anything, which is basically looking at what's being produced and saying, does this look like it's problematic in some way, and therefore, should I censor it? But there is this enormous problem of balance in AI, certainly in the language models. And of course, Michael, for example, I mean, you think very much more in the case of images, but certainly in terms of balancing these things, there's this enormous field in ensuring that a model behaves the way you want it to. And I think we're going to see an awful lot of skills. And I don't think necessarily that's going to be a tech role potentially. I mean, it's almost like it goes into the lands of sociology and psychology and linguistics and all of these other areas that don't necessarily require you to have that kind of computers, a very linear way that we think as technologists. I'm a computer programmer and I write I write my imperative code and I objects and I think in that way. And once you get into the world of these huge models, these sort of neuromorphic things, it ceases to be, we've almost moved to the other side of the brain again. And it could be that we can engage parts of the workforce who have been frozen out by computers for the last 30 years, and all of a sudden their skills may become more relevant. So we may find that we're employing, certainly again, in the short to medium term, we may find that we're able to make much better use of a broader range of people.
Yeah. Samuel.
Oh yeah. Skills. Would people need better skills? Would people need more skills to do this? The way I see it, because of the nature of this particular thing, it's going to make it easier for people to use. It's going to enhance existing skills. There's going to be many ways. I'm a programmer, for instance, and suppose I've got somebody else who wants to do some programming. How will this enhance that person's skill? Will this make it harder for that person to do his programming? You know, you've got new things. You've got user-friendly interfaces. You got, even if you're talking about having to train in order to use these AI APIs and all these things, they've made that easy as well. You've got pre-trained models. You've got even no-code and low-code platforms that are being driven off the back of AI. So in general, I think people would not need too much. They wouldn't need too much reskilling in order to cope with AI. There are other questions, of course, because of course we've linked this question with maybe how it will affect people's jobs and all that. That's a different matter. But in terms of, will people need more skills? Will it have a more demand? Will it be a steeper learning curve in order to get into a profession as a result of this? I think no, I think it is the opposite.
Yeah.
May I just pick up on something, just something that Michael said actually. I think it's a really interesting thought experiment. Michael, you mentioned this idea of, well, I've got this programming companion, you know, very much a case of, well, here's some code, you know, can you help me with this, or where's the bug, all of those sorts of things. Have I got, you know, and I mean, that's going to progressively get better, right? So to begin with, you've got this thing that, you know, maybe it's like a junior programmer, or actually it's not really, it's a bit better than that, but the you know, potentially it's getting better and better over time, and you're getting more and more help from it, and at a certain point it's better than you. It's just better than you in every way, shape or form. When you get to that point, what is it that what's the human element that we add that adds value at that point? What was it about humanity that is adding value to the work at that point?
I think
open question to the rest of you.
I
you know, I
like
just
the question
thought it was an interesting comment about the partner.
Yes, I think there is still going to be much to be added, because the first thing I will observe is that we don't know what's going to happen when it gets to that point. And what I think is going to happen is going to be, we're going to develop more ideas. We're going to have more to do. Every solution that we've put forward so far it may have solved a problem, but it has caused more problems. There's always a side effect that we have to solve. And this particularly, some of the things in programming that may be taken over by AI may be enhanced and so forth. Maybe these are tasks that if we let somebody else do it, it should free us up to do more higher level tasks as well. Yeah. So I have no fear that we're going to become redundant once once this thing has happened.
I think in some ways you're right. I think we're going to find new skills that we don't know about yet. You know, in the 1950s, 60s, did we really think we were going to have business analysts, separate programmers, database designers? All these jobs have evolved out of things. I think using AI, we're going to come up with a lot of new concepts.
But John, John, what's to stop the AI from doing those things too?
It quite probably will be. As
Could I
things
just add,
in the short term, then long enough to get me out of my career. I am something that came up both in the previous bit and this about skills is I'm a big Isaac Asimov fan, and in there they have these analysts that analyze what the robots are thinking and why they thought it. And I think we did say, how do we know what they're thinking, why they get to it? And I could see a whole new career there for somebody.
Oh,
Yeah.
Until they work out how to analyze themselves in the long distant future when they're far better than we are. So I am going to move us on. Bizarrely, I only thought that'd take 5 minutes. This is a wide-ranging discussion. I realise we're sort of running out of time. If people are happy to stay, that's fine. If not, we'll see where we get to. Do we need changes to the legal system and who decides? So we've got obviously the usage of AI, the regulations. Can it be contained if I think America, isn't it, trying to bring in rules on it, but what stops Russia, China, whoever, running away with letting it go? Have we already let the genie out of the bottle? There's the discussion about ownership, authorship, copyright, and of course ethics. And I can just see, we're in a situation now where with social media, it hit the world, and then about a few years ago, obviously, hold on a minute, that's my personal data, and they're now trying to retrofit the laws back into social media. Is it that we need to get law into AI before it starts running out of control? So it's a big subject. Do we need if we cover it as just the legal issues of AI? I'm just trying to think who I didn't start with. I think I'll go with Samuel on this.
All right. Do we need new laws? We absolutely needed new laws even before this thing started. We should start making laws to preempt it, and we should start making laws as we go along. That is the work of legislation. That's a whole profession by itself, and they have a responsibility to do it. Already, there is work in there are regional efforts, national efforts within organizations and institutions like ourselves already looking at laws, looking at guidelines, looking at regulations. And this is something we must keep doing. Regarding something like copyright, for instance, we must, as a matter of urgency, decide who owns what. If something is spawned on AI, we must decide whether it's the AI company that owns it or all that must be quickly ironed out before it is too late. It is a matter of responsibility. We have issues regarding what if something goes wrong? What if one of the AI chatbots or tool makes a decision and it goes out of hand? Who is to blame? All this, thankfully, I'm not in the legal profession, but we know it is people they have these responsibilities already to start looking at these things and making it clear. And within our institution, IAP, we probably need to start looking at setting up committees and bodies to start giving guidelines and collaborating with other people in doing this.
Yeah. Ben.
Oh wow! Didn't think you were going to come to me. It's a really interesting question. It's an interesting one. I mean, are we going to need new laws? Right. This is the interesting thing. I mean, it's very easy to be parsimonious about the law. So, for example, someone might say to you, well, all an AI is doing, so in Michael's industry, for example, all the AI is doing is it's looking at lots of images and then it's drawing a picture. And my 4-year-old does that, and no one gets angry about that. No one gets angry about my 4-year-old doing that. It's what humans have done forever. And so you say, well, surely the law's clear. You know, it's a new creation. It's the net is like a brain and it's like a person, so it's creating a. Yes, you see, of course, we're shaking our heads because we know instinctively it's different. And the problem is one of scale. When you can do something en masse, you can do it almost infinitely at the speed of light. You know, in a million instances, all of a sudden things change. Law is a human construct, and it's going to have to change to take account of the fact that the fundamental kind of rules of the game have changed. How they're going to change, I haven't the faintest idea. There are a lot of lawsuits kicking off everywhere right now. You know, we're seeing people suing each other over images being used in things. Different jurisdictions are going to come up with all sorts. It's going to be like the start of the internet, but a million times worse, basically. And we're going to get some very peculiar changes to the law, I would have thought, as a result of this. Hopefully as pragmatic as possible, but we'll see.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, just I brought up the subject of Sensei earlier on, probably being the only imaging engine, graphics engine out there that probably will stay within the law, simply because the image library is controlled already by Adobe. So that's interesting. The other area, of course, I've been having a lot of things of is subject you, John, you brought up earlier on, of what has happened to me recently. I've come back from Moldova because of the war in Ukraine. The reason why I was in that part of the world in the first place is because it's quite a major outsourcing area for software development, Ukraine, Moldova, and that area of the world. And now we have a war there. We have all these men that have been forced to stay behind in Ukraine, a lot of software developers there, as you can probably imagine, a lot of software development being done directly now for security on weapon systems, etc. And that is a very big concern. And we talk about laws in the world. You know, one of the main organizations in the world is the United Nations. The presidency of the United Nations Security Council at the moment is currently being presided over by what everybody is now calling a terrorist state. So if that gives you some sort of an idea of the amount of control that we actually potentially can have in the world, it doesn't give you a lot of confidence, does it really? The fact the United Nations can't, has allowed that to happen. And I think that that is the other social media. Whatever controls we put in, it goes back to a bit like global warming, doesn't it? Global warming in the UK, we can all become carbon neutral and so on. But whatever we do here doesn't affect what is potentially happening in other parts of the world, in less developed countries, and China and India and so on. We actually don't have a lot of control over it. And I think that's the main worry. If in terms of defense or attack, in which case of the Russians, if whatever controls we put on where this technology is being used in defense systems, it probably isn't going to have an effect on those other countries. So it's going to be a bit like what is happening with nuclear weapons. The fact Russia, can regularly say, well, we'll use our nuclear weapons, and what can we really do about it? I think that's the issue. And then what happens is we get behind. So maybe what actually happens in lots of these countries, in the US and the UK, is we say, actually, we're going to control this. We're going to put all these new laws and regulations in place, but in the background, actually, we continue and we start to put these systems in. At the moment in Ukraine, I know that they're looking at trying to put artificial intelligence into drone software. And we're not going to put controls behind it because we in the West want Ukraine to win, and we want to find every way that we can get them to win. But what happens when that war finishes in the future and that technology gets moved around all over the world?
Yeah. Nathan.
Well, it's an interesting question. I first of all, I think what we need is more responsibility and more traceability. The purpose of laws, fundamentally, I think, is to prevent abuses either of human rights or of sort of ownership. And we will inevitably need to implement some sort of set of laws, both changes to existing laws in order to cater for where AI is responsible or has had a part to play in the perpetration of a crime, but also sort of changes, but also laws with regards to sort of the legal uses of AI. I do think sort of that we need to get ahead of the curve by ideally establishing an international body. Sort of the IATF, for example, sort of is one such international body which is non-political, but which sort of has obviously sort of the agreements of many commercial organisations sort of as well in terms of adopting things. I also think that we would need to have some kind of set of protocols which would provide some kind of standardization in terms of how AI should be used, because there will be over time multiple different AI systems that will need to be able to interoperate together. And I think sort of the earlier these are set up, the less likely we are sort of to have challenges and problems later on. But ultimately, sort of bearing in mind that AI is effectively creating new content, one of the questions that's going to come up, and it's already been alluded to sort of by members of the panel, is who is actually responsible or even owns or is author of that AI content. It obviously can't be the AI device itself, because that at the moment has got no legal status. Unlike, for example, a limited company. But then neither sort of should it be necessarily sort of the company that runs the AI system any more than a social media sort of company is responsible for any content published on its portals. They will inevitably require sort of changes to laws, but ideally the industry should be clubbing together sooner rather than later and proposing a sensible, responsible way to operate, rather than waiting for national governments to start instituting laws, which obviously sort of will happen after the horse has bolted.
Yeah, we sort of gone through that very quickly. I'm wary of time, so what I'm proposing is we'll have a quick from each of you 1 minute on what is the future of AI, and then we'll open it up to questions. So let's try Ben again.
Oh dear. Well, I'm afraid you've come to the sort of singularity maximalist here, I'm afraid. So I think it goes one of two ways. I mean, if you're talking what's the future hold, we're going to go future, right? I don't see. Up until about half a year ago, the two proponents of the singularity, they call it. And I'll explain it. This idea that once you get intelligent enough AI, we know that we can ask a ChatGPT, for example, to write code, right? And we know that we can tell it, we can use genetic algorithms or this, that, or the next thing to basically tell it to create a cleverer version of itself, and it'll fail thousands of times, and eventually it'll succeed, and then that one will be asked the same one, carry on like that, and what you get is effectively a runaway reaction where an increasingly intelligent AI produces increasingly intelligent versions of itself, and that stops with the end of the known universe. That was proposed by Werner Vinge, Ray Kurzweil, and I thought they were crackpots. And there was something about the most recent developments that changed my mind. And I don't believe it's necessarily going to happen tomorrow, but I'm kind of bought into this now. And I think at some point this is going to run away with itself. And the question is, it either runs away with itself or we stop it. And I don't know which is going to happen, but either way, it'll be interesting.
It will. Michael.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing I'm seeing, I see this with ChatGPT, and I see that, at the moment we have a kind of division between robotics and systems, we see running on computers like, ChatGPT and some of the tools that have been built on that. I think I think the biggest fear for me is when the two come together. We aren't at the point yet where AI is doing 3D printing and creating components and that sort of thing. But at some point, the two are going to come together. We're seeing it, with the self-driving cars and this sort of thing. But so and I think we're a little way off that yet, where the two come together. But I think when the two do come together, I think I think that's really we're going to see some huge advances. From my own point of view, it's quite interesting with what I call the text-based AI. It's quite interesting when I use it at the moment. There is a significant difference in the usability between if I'm looking at code, for example, code which is widely available. In other words, types of code, so user interface type code, JavaScript, all that sort of thing, and those areas that I work with. For example, if I wanted to work on something like a web user interface or UI type of stuff, maybe some back-end code, it's pretty good at it. As soon as it starts going into those areas, what I would call more of a vertical market, it just doesn't work at all. I mean, the number of software developers that work with Adobe Illustrator in the world, for example, is tiny, and therefore the data which is available to the AI engine that have come from APIs, software developers kits, and they say. So I think I think it's going to move at different rates depending on the types of information that it's available to it. It's based on the data, after all.
Yeah, Samuel.
Future of AI. I think inevitably, like all other technologies that have preceded it, it will change the human identity. It will change, just like was said before, what it means to be human, inevitably. But whether it's for the good or for the better, I do not know. There's good news that it will be, productivity will skyrocket. Things will be easier. A frightening one, I think, will be about decision making and autonomy. There's a frightening thing around there when it starts to encroach upon our autonomy. So that's likely to happen. It will change. Already, social interactions have changed as a result of the internet. So we should expect something similar in future for AI, maybe at a higher. We have had prophecies about this from novelists in the past, like Aldous Huxley and all these other, and what they thought would happen. We should expect maybe glimpses of that to happen in future as AI, maybe sometimes, who can predict in 100 years, or not even as far ahead as that.
Thank you. And to finish off, Nathan.
Well, I'm excited about the potential future of AI. Human beings are a most remarkable creature that over millennia have proven that they can evolve depending on their changing circumstances, and usually end up smarter and better for it. I sometimes say to people when they ask me the question, what will happen to my job with AI? And I sometimes ask them, if I freed up 2 days of your working week, what would you do with that time? And often people come up with all sorts of ideas of things that they've been meaning to do, would like to do, and to some degree, I think that's what will happen when people are freed up from doing some of the things that they're doing at the moment, because AI can do it better or faster. People have got a range of other things that they'd like to do, but they just haven't got around to doing. And I think that's why I think AI has the potential to release a lot more human ingenuity and developments. And finally, I would also just say that the time when I feel that we need to be worried about AI, and for me this is one of the real tests of AI, is when an AI program can ultimately prevent its own destruction. Because when that happens, then we've lost control and we've gone too far.
Wonderful. So before we get to questions, I'd just say myself, I think AI is just moving quickly. We started the year with ChatGPT 3.5 or 3.5. 4 is now the default. I could see easily by the end of the year as being on version 8, 9 or 10, because literally it changes daily. And the ChatGPT is obviously the one that seems to have made the news, but it isn't alone. There are a lot of other AIs out there that people just aren't aware of, been hidden or whatever. I think there'll be new tools, there'll be new jobs. And while it might not affect us today, it might do tomorrow. For myself, I use ChatGPT to generate outline code for WordPress plugins. It does it very quickly, does exactly what I want it to do. What I would say with all of these at the moment, you still have to phrase it properly. So that might be a new job, is someone who can interpret it what somebody wants and tell it. But of course, ChatGPT 22 will probably come along and understand how, particularly in the English language, how weird it can be. So yeah, I think that'd be quite good. So I'll open the floor up to Q&A. I see a couple of people have dropped out, but not many. So if anyone would like to ask a question of the panel, please raise your hand and I will see if I can see your hands coming up. So I will start with Nick Roberts, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hello. I'm going to go back to, I've made a comment on it in the chat, but I was going to go back to Samuel's comment about low code, no code. I think I can remember 4th generation database stuff coming out, I don't know, in the 90s or something, and everybody, oh, that'll be the end of database programmers and all that kind of thing. And I think where you've got AI coming in now, and somebody else mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was Michael, about the fact that I don't need an assistant because I've now got an AI, you know, free or low cost that can help me without, you know, a person being there. And the comment I made in the chat was, and I guess I'd throw this open to the panel to comment on, because I thought Samuel brought it up quite nicely, as he said, you know, low code, no code didn't end a programmer's life, it just moved him up in the food chain. So I would say, and I'm only talking about from a programming perspective, because I've got other thoughts on what AI is doing elsewhere and in the intelligence world and so on. But I think from a programming perspective, which is, I guess, where you know, this esteemed group is thinking, I just view it as being, for the time being anyway, that it moves us up in the food chain. So I'd open that for your thoughts.
Who'd like to start?
I think I kind of sounded a note of sort of disagreement with that one. It simply on the basis that I think that there's and I think we have to talk medium term, right? It's not an immediate thing, but at some point, you cease to be the most intelligent person in the room as a human being, and I think when that happens, I think all bets are off. What even with low code, no code, all that we're doing is automating away drudgery. But AI doesn't automate drudgery away. AI automates away abstract thought, and that's, for me, that's a different proposition. So I think it opens up a world of very interesting possibilities. I don't know what they are. I can't imagine any of it really, to be honest with you. I think it's beyond our it's beyond the kind of the light cone of our imagination. But that would be the counter argument, that once it gets beyond our abilities, well, what are we here for?
I could see Nathan champing at the bit on.
Yeah, the thing is, you see, I think that human beings will be able to learn from AI. You know, over the centuries, human beings have discovered lots of things by chance, rather than by design. And as a result of those chance discoveries, humanity has learned from it, and often has actually built on it. There's nothing wrong with humanity learning from original ideas and concepts that originate from AI, right? Obviously, sort of, we would need to strive to understand how it's arrived at that in order to sort of be able to deduce whether or not AI is correct in its assertions or hypotheses, or whether it's actually sort of going wrong. But you know, so all through the ages, various scientists and other people have actually discovered various things which, you know, for example, like sort of when Galileo was spouting about sort of the Earth not being flat, and people decried him, saying that he was a lunatic, right? So, you know, it turned out that actually he wasn't, and the rest of the world, most of the world was wrong. So just because we can't explain something doesn't mean we can't use it. We're all, you know, most people are used to using black box technology. People use cars without knowing how it works. People use computers without knowing how it works. People use third-party libraries, whether Java or other programming languages, without really exploring how it works. They just assumes they assume sort of that based on the interface, it does what it says in the tin. Only afterwards they sometimes find that actually it's faulty, and then they have to circumvent it. So human beings are used to using things or trying things out, even though we don't don't understand it. Obviously, we should tread with caution, but that doesn't mean we should be stopped in our tracks.
In support of your point, Nathan, the brilliant example was, I think, Go, certainly chess, but Go as well, where computers have come up with new strategies that the Go players have then started using. You know, they spotted the computers have come up with a completely different paradigm for playing the game, and they get used by the players. So there's a lot of good examples of that, particularly in those sorts of areas.
I think I would also like to say that maybe one thing we would learn is that it's not the most important thing that we should be the cleverest thing on the planet. As in, many of the inventions that we have made have been parroting or copying or getting inspiration from nature. So we want to make something that flies. We look at the birds and we do a lot of biology to actually get onto our technology.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else with a question? I've got no.
I think there
Edwin.
are a couple.
Oh, there we go. So there they go. Edwin, would you like to ask your question?
I'm just getting the allow it to use camera. Yes, there we go. Originally, I kicked off the whole concept of this with some emails within the body of the trustees. And my original one was basically saying that I thought that I could no longer recommend software engineering as a career, with the concept of a career being something that has a long-term prospect of it. I certainly think it's a job, certainly for the next foreseeable future. But I'd also like to observe that we have here panel members who are very articulate, very bright, probably multidisciplinary, but that actually is a self-selecting group, as you always find with this sort of thing. And I'm a little bit concerned in the terms of a career for those people who are at the lower end of it, who are probably not very good at interpersonal relationships and are probably definitely not very good on the linguistic front. And I certainly agree with Ben that I can see this shift away from the mathematical side, scientific mathematical type of people, to much more educational, legal, and I think that might essentially alienate quite a lot of people. So if they move into this area now, by the time they've qualified, by the time they've got into the business, they're going to find that it's moved to a different set of skills. How do you feel about that?
Who wants to go there?
I think that maybe learning needs to be more dynamic. Maybe the kind of courses that we set need to be more dynamic. And maybe we are starting to learn a lesson that the form of academic education and the training we give for professionals needs a little bit of revision to be a bit more forward looking. I think there are maybe people will now need to rely more on transferable skills that will allow them to interpret across all areas. Maybe it may be just a case to review the way we put together our training materials.
I'm going to go out on a limb and make a slightly peculiar statement. I think that we certainly need to be training. I mean, I've got 4 children, 3 of whom are school age, and 2 of whom are 9 years old, and they're asking me about careers. I think that we're going to need a generation of Renaissance people, that's for sure. And that's basically, so I'm just restating what Samuel said, basically dynamic education. But I think that there's the possibility that we need to be training people in almost, it's almost a sort of level of self-knowledge, because I think that the danger with AI is it will drive a level of sort of metaphysical anime amongst people. If everything is being done for them, and we talked about, if Samuel asked that question, is it necessary that we're in control? But I think that's what we're getting about. That's what, when we're talking about the transforming what it means to be a person. Well, if you're not in control anymore, then things are very different. What happened during the Enlightenment was that mankind gained control over nature through the application of science. And I think what may happen, and this is this is me speculating, and this is not sort of a work-related comment at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something a little bit like the Enlightenment in reverse, in as much as humanity being put in a position where they're dealing with the essential unknown, finds that rather than science being the way they think about the world, goes back to, it may even drive a massive uptake of religion. We may see people becoming more religious, and that may inform this need for the solution to that metaphysical anime caused by the introduction of AI. So in answer to your question, and sort of coming back down to earth, I think we need people who are able to ask very profound questions and answer them to their own satisfaction. That was where I would go with this.
Wow. Does anyone else want to add anything? No, that's fine. In which case, Edwin, if you don't mind, I'll move on to ask Neil for his question. Neil.
The camera and the mic. Can you right? Okay. I'm very interested in the issue about responsible use of AI. I was particularly struck by Ben's comment about AI producing stuff that nobody can understand, and therefore people aren't prepared to step over the line to try it out. But there will be people who will. And there's been a recent comment in the chat by Simon Reed where he says, gambling sites, they already use psychologists to make their stuff compulsive. Applying learning AI to those kinds of sites, I'm just reading what he's written, run by people who only care about profit and not about social harm, could make life-destroying addictions. And that's like only one tiny thing. I suspect there'll be lots of other areas where that could happen. And the issue I would like to ask about is, what practically do you believe that you can do to limit the runaway of AI? Because this runaway could do a lot of damage to us, not because the AI itself says, oh, I'm going to be in control, but because people who want to abuse it, as they abuse the internet all the time, will get control of it. I'd also point out, you mentioned about law and regulation, and of course, we don't have it in respect of gene therapy and manipulation of genes. Countries do their own thing. So what do you think practically can be done? Because presumably many of the people that are in this organization may well be involved in AI, yeah, and the development of AI. What can we do as practical people to try to mitigate that?
Can
Well,
okay,
who'd like to go with
let's-
that?
Okay, can I just have a word,
Yeah.
just something for that, is that what we can do is we need to go beyond worrying about things, but actually doing something about it. Now there's going to be a groundswell of people who have serious misgivings about what could go wrong. And it is important to have such people actually turning it into a profession, turn it into, and we need to bring it to the world and do whatever it is right legally. So this could create maybe the jobs around the legal area, the job around research, the job, what exactly. I think this is one thing we need to do more, is to be prepared to step in there or collaborate with people who are working to try to solve these issues and to actually take it as a serious mission.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question that you pose, and I think the greatest peril, I mean, we're talking about runaway AIs being controlled by large companies. In the 1980s, of course, we saw the introduction of the personal computer, and before that we had mainframes. And when the personal computer came about, it was seen as this enormously democratizing measure, because all of a sudden everybody who could afford, you know, the money was able to get a computer and put it on their table and start doing their own thing with it. I think there's a strong argument that it is vital that we democratize AI. I think what we need is personal AI. That needs to happen. I think it will happen. It requires the Moore's law thing to carry on, you know, the transistors to get to the point where a person can have and properly train, not just customize like people are doing with ChatGPT at the moment and all these other models. They're just tweaking them to make them do things, but have their own AI that they've trained in. And you know, a future where you've got a sort of menagerie of different AIs with different characteristics that you can use. At that point, it's very much in your power. So maybe that's the hopeful part, that technology means that inexorably we'll get to a point where we've got personal AI, and perhaps that's the answer. Perhaps progress, perhaps.
Can I add? I think first of all, there needs to be a lot more conversations. There needs to be increased awareness. My daughter in school, who's studying sort of ICT, remarks how it's very dry. And my issue with the schools these days, they often seem to be behind the curve, and they should be basically sort of broadening sort of the discussions and talk about applications of IT, certainly today and in the future, because in 10 years' time she's going to be looking to get a job. But there need to be discussions, firstly amongst people like such as ourselves who are in the technology business, as well as sort of more articles and discussions amongst sort of the wider community, because if we try and run away or try and put the lid on AI and try and sort of close it up as they tried to do sort of 50 years ago, we're not going to stop sort of the progress of AI. We're just going to drive it underground. And what there needs to be, I think, there needs to be, at the very least at a national level, I'd like to see in this country, but ideally internationally, there needs to be sort of some non-political body that sort of brings together experts from various different fields and starts proposing various guidelines. There should be guidelines to begin with, not laws, but guidelines, and encouraging sort of all those industry, all those sort of companies to start following sort of those guidelines. We need to act responsibly now, not like climate change or global warming, where we're trying to play catch up. Because unlike sort of climate change or things that cause global warming, sort of AI has got the potential to unravel human society in very bad ways. Hopefully it won't go that way, but we need to have more conversations like this. But they need to be more than just conversations, but they actually need to lead towards the establishment of responsible ways of working.
Interesting. Sorry, can I come in?
Yeah, please do, Michael.
It's interesting we're talking about education. I'm down in the southwest of England, and when my two daughters were at school, there was only one head of IT at a secondary school down here in the southwest that had actually got any IT training whatsoever. And that has continued. And I think, we had the school strikes yesterday, where, basically the teachers are just saying, we're not being paid enough, and why anybody who does IT would go into be a teacher and go into education rather than go into industry. And that's been an ongoing problem for a long time. And of course, it's been an even worse situation with girls. The fact that men dominate the IT industry, and that's still very much the case. So if you want to start educating people, the other thing the schools are now having to contend with is actually banning artificial intelligence from being used in the schools. So really, we're not moving forwards in these areas. And this is where governments need to come in, and there need to be people advising government of what they should be doing next. People like us, for example. But do the government listen to specialists and listen to people who perhaps know what they're talking about? Because that's that is something which seems to got pushed out, especially since Brexit, isn't it? You don't listen to specialists anymore. They're wrong some of the time anyway. Listen to the politicians. So I think we do have some issues there.
Yeah. We need to found a think tank. That's the answer, isn't it? And then get some corporate sponsorship, and then we'll.
Yeah, for corporate.
Thank you for your answers. Appreciated.
Thank you.
Sorry. The point about corporate sponsorship is it potentially adds a bias, and that's the part of the problem. So it needs to be apolitical and non-commercial.
Yeah, I was being slightly sarcastic there. I'm sorry.
Okay, moving on. Chris, I see you put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the discussions we've had here about guidelines and laws and rules and behavior and ethics and things are kind of a bit late down the road now. The genie's out of the bag. This thing did not come out and invent itself. It was human generated by humans, with good humans, bad humans, all the frailties humans have, and will continue to have that in its mix up. Now, the problem is that we have good humans and we have bad humans. And one of the things I was going to say is, if you look at the security world at the moment, the information security world at the moment, they're looking at how they can use AI systems to counter AI systems that are being used to attack your system. So you're now looking at, do you use AI to defend against AI? And when you talk about things like your own personal AI system, then you start to get in the realms of, is your system right or is my system right? Who controls these? Who manages them? Who keeps them up to date? If it's right today, will it be right tomorrow? Will it be right in 10 years' time? Who checks all that? And so there's a whole load of discussions going on at the moment about what forms of artificial intelligence tool do we need now to manage those. And when you start talking about changes of the industry and changes in roles, it's who's going to do that and who's going to drive all those things. So I tend to agree there are going to be changes in roles, but there are going to be some very important people needed out there. And one of them, as you've already said, is teaching.
I think, Chris, I'll jump in before I ask the panel here. I think if I have my own personal AI, within a week, it will be at the psychiatrist.
Well, I have
that's
to
another
say,
one of the roles that we're going to be having.
Does anybody remember WordPerfect, the spell checker on WordPerfect? It used to say things like, I don't understand this word. Is it correct? Would you like to add it to the dictionary?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Within a week, I had a WordPerfect that couldn't spell.
And I'm moving back slightly in what you said about the legal aspects here and how we control it. I think, as I said earlier, social media had been around for a long time before people suddenly woke up and went, whose data is this? And we're now trying to crowbar, shoehorn, force in. Some countries are going one way, some are going the other way about social media, and who we're we're in a terrible state because we can't get the laws into social media. Whereas here we are, we've started. So if we're going to do it, this is the time to do it, not in 5 years' time when AIs are probably writing the laws for us. So
and the
I'll
big
open it
problem
up.
with that is a lot of these things are open source as well. So then you start to say, you know, if I come along and I change something, who's going to be in charge of judging whether that change is right or wrong, whether it should be there or shouldn't be there? Is the engine capable of doing it for itself, or are you going to start to need a panel of people who are going to look at changes to things and say, this is the change routine, this is how change is implemented, this is how we've agreed that's a valid change?
Yeah,
it's an interesting question, isn't it? How AI would develop in different countries. You know, I mean, there's a potential if you've got a country with a very strong ideology, but the AI insists on sort of disagreeing with the primacy of the North Korean dictator, for example. There's a lot of very interesting stuff that could develop there, and quite fascinated to see how that goes.
I think about this, whether AI would run away or what's going to happen and all that. I think we really haven't pushed the limits of our knowledge so far, because what it's doing, it's revealing to us that there's still a lot that we do not know. Now, for instance, we're now worrying about how do we collaborate with other countries to get it right? How do we stop people from misusing it? There's a whole load of things which are still within the domains of what should be human knowledge, and things which we should be striving to solve that we still haven't solved. And all this is telling me that yes, we have a lot of work to do, and we are not going to run out of imagination to do that work. How do we develop ethical guidelines, for instance, for AI, and not just develop it? How do we get everybody to key into it? That is a problem that needs to be solved. And we've got to be working on it as much as we can.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to wind up now. Purely, I apologise straight away because it's usually only an hour, and it's obviously a very, very, very in vogue topic at the moment. And as I said, we will try and we will run more webinars on, I think, on specific aspects, maybe even with some examples of coding and getting into AIs and showing how it all works. So first off, I'd like to thank Ben, Nathan, Michael, and Samuel. Great to have you as panelists. I also like to thank everyone that's attended. I know we lost a couple here. I think, as we've said, AI is changing day by day. I suddenly had two thoughts right at the end here. I don't know if any of you remember the Buck Rogers series in the 1970s or 80s, where they had Tweaky and the computer council, because human beings couldn't run things on their own because they were so stupid, and these computers ran the world for them. And I suspect some of what we've spoken about, are we heading for Asimov's 3 laws when it comes to AI? That would be an interesting